Hey there. This is just a little thing I'm working on right now from a production. And throughout the mixing process, I do some things to make sure that the bass and the kick drum are somewhat cooperative with each other. They're not going to sort of compete for space and make that mix muddy. And I'll show you what I've done here so far. Just play this real quick. So, I have a bass up here, and on it I have an EQ, and this is simply giving a bit of a cut, right around 70 or 80, and this is a fairly steep slope, 24 dB per octave at 72.5 hertz. So if I were to solo this bass, this is what it's going to sound like. Now without that filter, here's the bass, wide open. And with the EQ. The reason I've cut this here is because if you look at my kick drum, I have two kick drums, but this is the main one. If you were to look at this kick drum on a spectrum while it's playing, it's got a lot of resonance right here, okay? So the 50s, 60, and a little bit of 70 range. Quite a bit of 70 actually. So I don't really want my bass to be hogging this area if my kick drum is going to also want this area. So sometimes you'll want your kick drum to be cut a little higher and your bass to be sort of resonant lower frequencies, like if you're doing a genre that calls for that. A lot of times that's, things like drum and bass. You really want a lot of subs in the bass synths themselves. For this particular track, that's not what I want. I want the kick drum to be felt and heard in this low region here. And I want the bass to allow that kick drum to do that. I don't want the bass to be super thin, cutting it off up here or something, but I want those two instruments to kind of cooperate together. Okay, so. Hey, let's fickle where the cold wind blows, hands on the wheel. So really, it's really just a matter, if you're looking at this from an EQ standpoint, it's just a matter of looking at and listening to where your bass resonates and where your kick drum resonates. Do you need to maybe choose a different kick drum altogether or pitch your kick drum up or down to make it live where you want it to be and not conflict with your bass? The other thing I've done on this track, and I do this a lot, is I've got a compressor on this bass synth that is ducking whenever the kick drum hits. It's obviously a very common technique, sidechain compression, but if you don't use it yet, I'd recommend trying it. It really does help kind of further the effort to allow these two instruments to coexist in a mix and not compete. So every time the kick drum hits, this bass is being ducked by this compressor right here. And if you're using Logic, it's just a matter of going to your sidechain and selecting an instrument that you want to trigger the ducking. I like to use the vintage Opto model for this compressor when I'm doing sidechain because it seems to have the fastest attack, the most flexible release. I can make it instant release or I can make it really, really, really long. So it's very versatile, and I'll show you what that looks like while it's playing. So the compressor is ducking it by about 9 decibels on every kick drum hit. I've got the ratios set and the threshold set to where that amount of gain reduction is going to happen when the kick drum hits. If I turn the threshold up, you'll see what happens. Watch. Not going to have as much gain reduction because it's looking for a much louder signal. The higher I turn this threshold up, the less sensitive it is to the kick drum input that I've told it to listen to. If I turn the threshold down, it's going to be triggered by quieter signals. So it's going to be more sensitive. Ratio will also determine how much compression is applied once the audio crosses the threshold of negative 33-ish dB. I don't need a whole lot here because I've got the threshold so low that it's triggering a ton of compression even though I don't have a very high ratio. But if I turn the ratio up, you'll see what happens. I mean, it's virtually muting that kick drum on every kick drum. I'm sorry, muting that bass on every kick drum hit, almost 11-to-1 ratio. So I can turn it back down. Not going to go into huge depth on compression here, but I just wanted to show you that that's another technique that I like to do to just carve out some space for the kick drum and the bass. And if I solo the bass while it's being compressed, you'll hear it ducking on every kick drum hit. Here's with it bypassed. Compressor on. I'm going to turn on the metronome so you can hear where the kick drums would be. Bypassed. Okay, so just a little quick tip on a couple of things you can do if you're looking to help your kick drum and your bass coexist a little bit better.